Did medieval women only exist to churn out babies, die young, and never learn to read? Were their lives just a series of thankless chores in a cold, dark hut from roughly 500 to 1500 CE? Get ready for a reality check. Number 8, medieval women were expected to live very short lives, rarely surviving past childbirth or their early 20s. The image of medieval women dropping dead in their early 20s, after perhaps one or two terrifying childbirths, is a persistent one. It is a story often told, painting a picture of a bleak existence cut short by disease and hardship. However, the true narrative found in historical records tells a more complex story, one where many women lived full, active lives well beyond their youthful years, contributing to their families and communities for decades. Demographic studies based on skeletal remains and parish records from various European regions offer insights into actual lifespans. While infant and child mortality rates were shockingly high in the Middle Ages, pulling down the average life expectancy significantly, those who survived childhood often lived much longer. A woman who made it past the vulnerable years of infancy and early childhood had a good chance of reaching adulthood and beyond. Research by historians like Judith Bennett, who studied English rural life, points to numerous women in manorial records living into their 40s, 50s, and even 60s. These were not exceptional cases, but a regular feature of medieval society. The average life expectancy figure, often cited as low as 25 or 30 years, is heavily skewed by the tragedy of very young deaths, not by a universal early demise of adults. Archaeological findings from various burial sites across medieval Europe further support this longer lifespan. Examinations of bones from cemeteries in places like Warren Percy in England or the monastic burial grounds in Germany reveal skeletal evidence of women who reached old age, indicated by signs of arthritis, wear on teeth, and bone density changes typical of aging individuals. These physical remnants are silent witnesses to lives that continued long past the supposed early 20s cutoff. The presence of numerous older female skeletons contradicts the idea that all women succumbed quickly to the perils of the medieval world. These women, whose bones now tell their story, often showed signs of extensive physical labor, yet they endured for many years. Written records also paint a picture of enduring female presence throughout the life cycle. Wills from towns such as Florence in Italy or London in England frequently name grandmothers and great-aunts as beneficiaries or witnesses. The woman recorded in a Tuscan will from the 13th century left her possessions to her grandchildren, a clear indication she had lived long enough to see her children grow and have families of their own. In court documents from the English legal system, such as those kept in the Court of Common Pleas, show women appearing as plaintiffs or defendants over many years, their names cropping up in records across several decades, suggesting a continuous active presence in legal and social life. Many women were recorded as widows managing estates for 20, 30, or even 40 years after their husbands died, demonstrating not only their survival, but their sustained capacity for administration and oversight. The social roles of older women in medieval society also reveal their continued importance and presence. As grandmothers were vital in the upbringing of children, passing on skills, stories, and family traditions. In many communities, older women held respected positions as midwives, using their accumulated experience and knowledge to assist with births throughout their lives. Wise women, sometimes called cunning women or healers, relied on years of practice and observation to provide remedies and care for their communities. Their long lives allowed them to gather the extensive practical knowledge that was essential for their roles. A woman described in a 14th century French village record was known as the local expert on herbal medicine, a reputation she could only have built over many years of life and practice. While childbirth was indeed a significant risk, and maternal mortality was higher than in modern times, it was not universally fatal. The vast majority of women survived multiple childbirths. Records detailing the number of children born to women in various communities, such as those found in the genealogies of Counts of Flanders or in specific family histories, show many women bearing 5, 7, or even more children and continuing to live for many years afterwards. The survival of a woman after childbirth was more common than her death, despite the dangers. This is evident in the repeated mention of women in various roles and accounts across the years, after the birth of several children. The phenomenon of widowhood further underscores the reality of women living long lives. Many women outlived their husbands, often by significant periods, and sometimes remarried multiple times. The ability to enter into a second or third marriage implies a woman had lived a substantial portion of her life already and was still capable of managing a household and potentially bearing more children. Widows, especially those with dower rights, often gained considerable independence and control over property. For example, a widow in 15th century Norwich, England, ran her late husband's successful textile business for decades, actively participating in civic life and managing her finances. Her continued economic and social agency was a testament to her long and active life. These examples, scattered across various medieval European societies, challenge the narrow perception of medieval women's brief existence, instead revealing a more robust and enduring presence. Number 7. Medieval women were always passive and lacked any form of social or political influence. The idea that medieval women were entirely without influence, meekly accepting their fates without any say in the world around them, is a widespread misconception. History, however, reveals countless instances where women from various social strata actively shaped their communities, exerted considerable power, and participated in social and political life in ways often overlooked. Their influence might not always have been through formal channels, but it was potent and pervasive. Women were integral to the social fabric of villages and towns. In rural communities, they were crucial participants in village life, often present at manorial courts to witness transactions, settle disputes, or even bring complaints themselves. For instance, in 13th century English manorial court rolls, numerous women appear as defendants or plaintiffs, suing for debt, defending their property, or complaining about trespass. These legal engagements demonstrate their active participation and assertion of rights within their local systems. They were not silent observers, but engaged citizens of their small worlds. In urban centers, women were part of craft guilds and fraternities, participating in the social gatherings, processions, and charitable activities that were central to civic identity. The guild regulations from Cologne, Germany, in the 14th century show women listed as members, expected to attend meetings and contribute to the guild's welfare. While regency for minor heirs is often associated with noblewomen or queens, such as Eleanor of Aquitaine, who held significant political sway, the principle extended to ordinary women too. Widows, particularly those managing substantial landholdings or businesses, effectively acted as regents for their minor children. They made decisions about agricultural production, trade, and even local appointments. A widow in 14th century rural France might manage the family farm, negotiating leases, hiring laborers, and representing her children's interests at the local lord's court. Her influence over local economy and labor was undeniably political in its scope. These women were not just managing domestic affairs, they were running entire enterprises and participating in the wider economic and political landscape. Women also engaged in more direct forms of social and political action, sometimes even protests. Records from medieval towns occasionally mention women participating in food riots or demonstrations against unfair taxes or prices. In 1381, during the Peasants' Revolt in England, women were recorded among the rebels, actively participating in the marches and demands for change. They were not merely bystanders, but active agents in these widespread social upheavals. And beyond open rebellion, women frequently petitioned local authorities or even the crown for redress of grievances, protection, or favors. A collection of petitions to the English Parliament in the 15th century includes appeals from women seeking justice for stolen property, protection from violence, or licenses for trade, demonstrating their awareness of legal processes and their willingness to use them. Within the household, women often exerted significant influence, even if this was not always recognized by external legal structures. As managers of domestic resources, they controlled food, clothing production, and often household finances. They were the arbiters of internal family disputes and the primary educators of young children. Their advice was often sought by husbands and sons on matters ranging from business decisions to marital arrangements for their offspring. The household was a fundamental unit of medieval society, and the woman's role at its head bestowed a distinct, if informal, authority. Letters and account books from various medieval households show wives making purchasing decisions, managing servants, and entertaining guests, all activities that contributed to the family's social standing and influence. Moreover, women held significant influence through their patronage of local churches, hospitals, and charities. Wealthy townswomen, through their donations and endowments, supported religious institutions, commissioned artworks, or funded almshouses for the poor. This patronage provided women with avenues to express their piety and shape the spiritual and social landscape of their communities. For example, a merchant's widow in 14th century London might fund the construction of an altar in her local church or provide money for the upkeep of a bridge, leaving a lasting mark on her community. These acts of generosity not only ensured their spiritual merit, but also solidified their social standing and influence. These varied forms of engagement demonstrate that medieval women were far from passive. They were active participants, shapers, and often leaders in their social and political environments. Number 6. Medieval women were solely objects of male desire and had no spiritual or intellectual lives of their own. The persistent myth paints medieval women as existing primarily for marriage and procreation, valued solely for their physical attributes, and lacking any inner life or intellectual pursuits. This narrow view ignores the rich and diverse spiritual and intellectual lives many women cultivated, often against societal expectations. From profound religious experiences to significant scholarly contributions, medieval women carved out spaces for their own intellectual and spiritual development. The Middle Ages were an era deeply intertwined with religion, and women played a vital, often pioneering, role in its spiritual landscape. Female mystics like Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German abbess, experienced profound visions and wrote extensively on theology, natural science, and medicine. Her work, including Scivias and Physica, was widely circulated and respected even by male scholars and church leaders. Another example is Catherine of Siena, a 14th century Italian laywoman who became a prominent spiritual advisor, a political mediator, and a doctor of the church. Her writings and fervent activism influenced popes and rulers. While these women were exceptional, their existence points to a broader acceptance of women's spiritual authority and profound inner lives. Numerous other women, though not canonized or as famous, served as anchoresses, living solitary lives of intense prayer and contemplation, often sought out for spiritual guidance by both common folk and nobility. Beyond religious orders, many laywomen cultivated deep spiritual lives. Devotional texts, prayer books, and psalters were popular among women, and illuminated manuscripts often depict women engaged in prayer and study. The ownership and active use of these books suggests a personal engagement with religious texts beyond mere ritual. The Book of Marjorie Kempe, a 15th century English autobiography, recounts the spiritual journey of a married laywoman who embarked on pilgrimages and experienced intense visions. Her life story reveals a woman wrestling with complex theological questions and seeking a deeper connection with the divine, illustrating a vibrant personal spiritual landscape. Moreover, women were not merely recipients of spiritual knowledge, they were producers. Female scribes were active in convents, copying manuscripts, illuminating texts, and preserving knowledge. Some convents, such as the Abbey of Gandersheim in 10th century Saxony, were centers of learning where women like Rotsvit of Gandersheim composed plays and poems in Latin, drawing on classical and Christian traditions. Her dramatic works, the first known by a female author in Western Europe, demonstrate a sophisticated intellectual engagement. Even outside convents, some aristocratic women were patrons of scholars and commissioned books, indicating their appreciation for learning and their desire to access knowledge. For instance, Christine de Pizan, a 15th century French writer, was a prolific author who challenged misogynistic stereotypes in her works, such as The Book of the City of Ladies. Her existence as a professional writer supporting herself through her pen fundamentally challenges the notion of women lacking intellectual agency. The literacy among women, though varying by region and social class, was far from non-existent. While not all women could read or write, many could, particularly in urban areas or among the merchant class. Practical literacy was important for managing households, accounts, and businesses. A merchant's wife in medieval Italy might manage ledgers and correspond with her husband's business partners. In religious orders, literacy was a given, as nuns needed to read sacred texts and manage the convent's affairs. The girls from well-to-do families sometimes received an education at home from tutors or in small private schools, learning to read, write, and sometimes even Latin. The survival of letters written by women, such as those from the Paston family in 15th century England, offers direct evidence of their ability to communicate through writing and manage complex affairs. The spiritual and intellectual lives of medieval women were not singular or uniform, but they were undeniably present and often profound. They engaged with theology, created literature, pursued learning, and exercised their faith with fervent devotion. Their contributions to thought, literature, and religious practice stand as powerful counterexamples to the notion that they were solely objects of external desires, demonstrating a rich inner world often driven by personal conviction and intellectual curiosity. And number 5, medieval women had no voice or agency in their marriages. The common belief that medieval marriages were universally forced, loveless arrangements where women had absolutely no say in their own destinies, is a stark oversimplification. While arranged marriages were common, particularly among the elite, the reality for ordinary women was far more nuanced. And women often possessed a surprising degree of agency, expressed consent, and had legal and social mechanisms to protect their interests within the marital bond, or even to avoid it entirely. Consent, though interpreted differently than today, was a recognized component of medieval marriage. This canon law, the law of the Church, which governed marriage across Western Europe, stipulated that both parties must consent to the union. While parental pressure was undoubtedly immense, particularly for noble and wealthy families, outright force could invalidate a marriage in the eyes of the Church. Ecclesiastical court records from various dioceses, such as those in York, England, or from the Rhineland in Germany, show instances of women petitioning for annulment on grounds of coercion. These records demonstrate that women were aware of their right to consent and occasionally exercised it, despite the risks involved in defying family wishes. The ceremony itself often included a public declaration of consent from both bride and groom, a ritual that had legal and spiritual weight. The dowry or dower was a critical aspect of medieval marriage and often provided women with a degree of financial security and leverage. A dowry was the property or money brought by the bride to her husband at marriage, becoming part of the marital property. A dower, on the other hand, was the portion of her husband's estate, typically 1/3, that a widow was legally entitled to for her lifetime. For women without significant family wealth, the dower was especially crucial, as it provided an economic safety net in widowhood. Marriage contracts, particularly among the merchant and urban classes, meticulously detailed these financial arrangements, ensuring the woman's economic rights were protected. A contract from 14th century Genoa, Italy, might specify in detail what a bride brought and what she was guaranteed should her husband predecease her, giving her a tangible stake in the agreement. Marital disputes and separations, though not divorces in the modern sense, were recognized and handled by ecclesiastical courts. Women frequently initiated such legal proceedings seeking separation for reasons like spousal abuse, adultery, or impotence. While full divorce was rarely granted, legal separations and mens et thoro from bed and board allowed couples to live apart, and wives could sometimes secure financial support from their estranged husbands. Their court records from centers like Paris or London reveal women courageously bringing their grievances before judges, indicating a recognized avenue for seeking redress within a marriage that had become intolerable. These cases, while not common, show that women were not entirely without recourse when facing severe marital difficulties. Not every woman married. Options existed for those who wished to pursue a different path, particularly the religious life. Convents offered women an alternative to marriage, providing a space for spiritual devotion, intellectual pursuits, and a degree of autonomy. While entry into a convent often required a dowry-like payment, it was a choice made by many women seeking a life of prayer and study. For instance, numerous young women from urban merchant families in medieval Flanders chose to enter convents, where they could become abbesses, scholars, or artists, rather than marrying into local society. In some cases, women might also live as lay sisters or recluses, finding ways to exist independently outside the traditional marital framework. Within the household, a wife's role, especially in an urban or artisanal family, was far from passive. She often managed household servants, oversaw finances, and participated actively in the family business. In many crafts, the wife was an integral part of the production process, assisting her husband, selling goods, and keeping accounts. Her guild records from England and France reveal wives inheriting their husbands' businesses and continuing to run them successfully. The wife was typically the primary educator of young children and the manager of the domestic economy, making crucial decisions about purchases, food, and clothing. Her contributions were not just domestic labor, but often essential to the family's economic survival and social standing. The medieval household was often a joint enterprise, and the wife was an indispensable partner in its management, often exercising significant influence over decisions affecting the entire family. Number 4. Medieval women had no economic power or influence. The common narrative often suggests that medieval women were entirely dependent economically, without any real power or influence over financial matters. This perspective is incomplete, overlooking the diverse and significant economic roles women played. From managing businesses and participating in guilds to controlling property and engaging in finance, medieval women exercised considerable economic power and influence, often indispensable to the functioning of their households and the wider economy. Women were active participants in various craft and merchant guilds across medieval Europe. In many towns, particularly in England, France, and the Low Countries, women were members of guilds, sometimes as master craftswomen themselves or as widows inheriting their husband's guild status. There are guild records from Paris in the 13th and 14th centuries list women among the members of various trades, including silk weavers, embroiderers, and cap makers. These women paid dues, participated in guild meetings, and adhered to guild regulations, demonstrating their full membership and involvement in economic governance. They held property, trained apprentices, and produced goods for sale, contributing directly to the urban economy. The fact that women were often listed by name in these records refutes the idea of their economic invisibility. Many women ran businesses independently, particularly after their husbands died. Widows, especially those with established businesses, often continued their husbands' trades, such as brewing, baking, or textile production. In cities like London, Rouen, or Augsburg, women operated taverns, bakeries, and workshops, managing employees, sourcing raw materials, and selling their products. They engaged in commercial transactions, signed contracts, and dealt with creditors and debtors. The accounts of the city of Bristol in England mention numerous women who were successful merchants and traders in the 14th and 15th centuries, dealing in everything from cloth to foodstuffs. These women were not merely assisting, they were the heads of their own economic enterprises, making strategic decisions and accumulating wealth. Women also engaged in financial transactions, including lending money and managing inheritances. Wealthy widows and even some married women, especially in urban centers, acted as moneylenders, providing capital to other merchants or individuals. This informal lending played a crucial role in the local economy, particularly when formal banking institutions were less developed. Records from Italian city-states like Florence and Venice show women involved in intricate financial networks, managing dowries, inheritances, and investments. They held mortgages, rented out property, and oversaw the financial futures of their families. For example, a woman in 15th century Florence might administer an entire estate, including investments in trade ventures and rental properties, ensuring the family's continued prosperity. Control over property, particularly dower lands and other inherited assets, gave women significant economic power. As discussed earlier, a widow's dower rights ensured her a portion of her deceased husband's estate, which she controlled for her lifetime. This land or property could be farmed, rented out, or used to generate income, providing her with financial independence. Women also inherited property from their own families, whether land, houses, or goods which they could manage, sell, or bequeath as they wished. Legal documents such as charters and conveyances from England and France frequently record women as grantors or grantees of property, demonstrating their legal capacity to own and transfer assets. A woman might lease out fields she inherited or sell a house she owned, directly engaging with the property market. Furthermore, women were indispensable in the marketplace as both sellers and buyers. Peasant women brought surplus produce from their farms to local markets, selling eggs, butter, cheese, and vegetables. Urban women often sold goods from stalls in city markets, including cooked food, textiles, and household items. They were active participants in the daily commerce that sustained medieval towns and cities. As buyers, they made decisions about household provisions, clothing, and tools, influencing local demand and production. The market was a vibrant space where women conducted significant economic activity, negotiating prices, exchanging goods, and contributing to the flow of wealth. Their presence in these open commercial spaces was a clear sign of their direct economic participation, shaping the daily rhythms of medieval economic life. Number 3. Medieval women were solely confined to the domestic sphere and never worked outside the home. The persistent image of medieval women as house-bound figures, their lives limited to cooking, cleaning, and child-rearing within the confines of their homes, fails to capture the breadth of their economic activity. The reality was that women, regardless of their social standing, were crucial contributors to the economy, working extensively both within and outside the home in a wide array of occupations. Their labor was not merely supplementary, but often fundamental to family survival and the functioning of society. In rural areas, which comprised the vast majority of medieval Europe, women's work was intrinsically linked to agriculture. Peasant women toiled alongside men in the fields, participating in every stage of the agricultural cycle. They helped with plowing, sowing seeds, weeding, and especially the arduous task of harvesting. During harvest season, the entire family, including women and older children, would work from dawn till dusk gathering crops. Beyond the fields, women were responsible for tending kitchen gardens, raising small livestock like chickens and pigs, milking cows, and processing dairy products. Manorial court rolls and tax records from various parts of England and France frequently list women as co-laborers or even primary laborers on farms, indicating their essential role in food production. A 13th century illuminated manuscript might show women gleaning in the fields after the reapers, gathering every last stalk of grain. In urban centers, women were actively involved in numerous trades and crafts. They worked as brewers, bakers, textile workers, and innkeepers, often running their own businesses. In brewing, in particular, was a widespread female occupation, with alewives operating brewhouses and selling their products from their homes or stalls. Tax records from medieval towns like Coventry in England or Paris in France show numerous women listed as brewers or bakers, indicating their contribution to the urban economy. Women were also dominant in the textile industry, particularly in spinning and weaving. The production of cloth was a major industry, and countless women earned their living as spinners, carders, or weavers, often working from their homes but producing goods for sale in the wider market. They were integral to the production chain that clothed medieval society. Wage labor was another significant area of female employment outside the home. Women worked as day laborers in fields during peak agricultural seasons or as casual labor in urban workshops. They might be hired for specific tasks like cleaning, threshing, grain, or assisting in construction. Records from the English royal household accounts, for example, show payments made to women for various services. In towns, women also worked in service industries as laundresses, cleaners, or domestic servants in wealthier households. These roles required them to leave their own homes and contribute their labor to others, earning wages that were crucial for their survival or for supplementing family income. A common laborer's household in medieval London would often rely on the wages earned by the wife as a laundress or street vendor. Specific service industries were also heavily populated by women. Wet nurses, for instance, were professional caregivers hired to breastfeed the children of wealthier families. This was a paid occupation that required women to leave their own homes, sometimes for extended periods, and reside with their employers. Our innkeepers and tavern owners were often women, who not only managed the premises but also prepared food, served drinks, and provided lodging. These establishments were public spaces, and women running them were visible figures in their communities, engaging with customers and managing staff. Examples from city ordinances in places like Dijon in France or Lübeck in Germany refer to regulations for female innkeepers, confirming their prevalence in these roles. Ultimately, women's work, whether inside or outside the home, was not merely supplementary but essential to the survival and economic well-being of medieval families. The concept of a clear division between domestic and public spheres was far less rigid than it became in later centuries. The household was a unit of production, and women's labor, whether in the fields, the workshop, or the market, directly contributed to the household income and the broader economy. Their hands kneaded the bread, spun the yarn, harvested the crops, and sold the goods, providing the very sustenance and material wealth of medieval society. Number 2, medieval women had no legal rights and could not own property. The assertion that medieval women were entirely devoid of legal rights and property ownership is a significant misunderstanding of historical reality. While their legal standing varied based on marital status, social class, and geographical region, many women, especially single women and widows, held significant legal agency and the ability to own, inherit, and manage property. Even married women retained certain rights and protections under the law. One of the most important legal protections for medieval women was the concept of dower. As mentioned before, dower was the provision for a widow from her husband's estate, typically 1/3 of his lands and property, which she held for her lifetime. This was not a discretionary gift, but a legal right enshrined in common law across much of Western Europe. Upon her husband's death, a widow could claim her dower in court if it was withheld. This gave her independent access to land, income, and resources, allowing her to live autonomously and often manage substantial estates. The English common law, for instance, clearly defined a woman's right to dower, and numerous court cases attest to women exercising this right throughout the Middle Ages, suing to enforce their claims. Women also appeared in court as plaintiffs and defendants, demonstrating their legal standing. In local manorial courts, which handled everyday disputes, women brought cases concerning debt, trespass, land use, and inheritance. They presented evidence, swore oaths, and negotiated settlements, just like men. Urban court records from cities like London or Paris show women engaged in commercial disputes, defending their property rights, or seeking redress for defamation or violence. For example, a woman in a 14th century London hustings court record might be seen defending her claim to a shop inherited from her father, a legal action requiring full legal capacity. The ability to initiate legal proceedings and respond to them signifies a recognized presence within the legal system, not an absence of rights. The ability to make wills and control personal property was another crucial legal right for many women. Single women and widows who were feme sole, legally independent, had full legal capacity to own, manage, and dispose of property as they wished. They could inherit land, houses, goods, and money, and they could sell them, lease them, or bequeath them in their wills. A widow in 15th century Germany might draw up a detailed will, leaving specific sums of money to her children, her servants, and her church, and distributing her personal belongings as she saw fit. Even married women, though legally subject to their husband's feme covert, often retained control over certain personal property, or could make specific bequests through their husband's consent, or through the specific customs of particular towns or regions. It's customary law in many urban centers, for instance, granted married women more independence in trade and property than common law. The legal status of single women and widows was remarkably strong. As feme sole, they were treated as independent legal persons able to enter into contracts, incur debts, conduct business, and appear in court without a male guardian. This allowed many women to run successful businesses, manage significant estates, and live independent lives. A single woman in medieval Bologna, Italy, might engage in textile production, owning her workshop, employing workers, and managing her own finances, all under her own legal authority. Widows, in particular, often became powerful figures in their communities, combining the legal autonomy of a femme sole with control over their deceased husband's assets and businesses. Pre-marriage contracts, particularly in urban and commercial contexts, often meticulously detailed the property arrangements, providing safeguards for the woman's economic interests. While some property might become communal, the contract would frequently specify what assets the wife retained personal control over, or how her dowry would be managed and returned to her in certain circumstances. These legally binding agreements protected a woman's financial contributions to the marriage and ensured her security if the marriage ended due to death or separation. The meticulousness of these documents, found in archives across Europe, showcases a careful consideration of women's property rights within the marital union, challenging the notion of their legal powerlessness. Number one, medieval women were universally uneducated and illiterate. The persistent myth that medieval women, particularly ordinary ones, were universally uneducated and illiterate paints a misleading picture of their intellectual lives. While formal schooling was not as widespread as today, and literacy rates certainly varied, many women acquired valuable forms of education, whether practical, spiritual, or academic, challenging the notion of widespread ignorance. The literacy rates among women, though generally lower than men's, were far from non-existent, especially in urban centers and within religious communities. Research based on signatures on legal documents, book ownership, and references in wills indicates that a significant minority of women, particularly in the mercantile and craft classes, could read and sometimes write. In cities like Norwich, England, or Florence, Italy, where commerce flourished, merchant wives and daughters often needed practical literacy for managing household accounts, recording transactions, and corresponding with family members or business partners. Guild records from various towns sometimes required female members to be able to read and write to manage their businesses effectively. Convents were vital centers of learning for women. The nuns received formal education, learning to read Latin and the vernacular, study scripture, and engage with theological texts. Some convents maintained extensive libraries and functioned as scriptoria, where nuns themselves copied, illuminated, and even authored manuscripts. The intellectual output of convents like Helfta in Germany, where mystics like Mechthild of Magdeburg and Gertrude the Great produced significant spiritual literature, demonstrates the high level of education available to women within these institutions. Even for women who did not enter a convent for life, some spent a period there receiving an education before returning to secular life. Beyond formal institutions, a great deal of education happened within the home. Girls from wealthier families might be tutored privately, learning not only reading and writing, but also subjects like arithmetic, music, and sometimes even a second language, particularly if their family was involved in international trade. Practical literacy was essential for managing complex households, overseeing servants, and keeping track of inventories. The Paston Letters, a collection of correspondence from a 15th century English gentry family, includes numerous letters written by women such as Margaret Paston, showcasing their ability to write and manage complex family and estate affairs. This personal correspondence provides direct evidence of women's active engagement with written communication. Even for those who were not fully literate in the modern sense, access to written texts and knowledge was available through other means. Many people, including women, would have experienced literature and religious texts through public readings, sermons, and storytelling. Illuminated manuscripts, often depicting biblical stories or lives of saints, conveyed narratives visually, allowing non-readers to grasp complex concepts. Books of hours, popular devotional texts often contained images that could be read even if the accompanying Latin text was not fully understood. This communal engagement with written culture meant that knowledge was not limited to individual literacy, but shared and absorbed through various forms of oral and visual transmission. In essence, the picture of medieval women's education is far more varied and dynamic than the blanket assumption of illiteracy allows. While formal schooling was not universal, many women achieved functional literacy for practical purposes, pursued advanced learning in religious settings, and engaged with written culture through communal means. Their intellectual lives were rich, contributing to the vibrant tapestry of medieval society and demonstrating a capacity for learning and knowledge that defies the common misconception.